On this edition of Primetime Politics, the Trudeau government's ban on Huawei, MPs will be in with their reactions and to discuss what comes next. We'll speak with Danielle Smith, the first candidate to launch her campaign to replace Jason Kenney as leader of Alberta's Conservatives. And our journalist panel looks at the week in Conservative politics from Alberta to the latest in the federal Tory leadership race. But we start with the fallout from the Trudeau government's much-awaited announcement that China's Huawei Corporation will now be banned from Canada's 5G communications networks. On Friday, the Prime Minister had this to say about the announcement.
We're very aware that this is a decision that hasn't been an easy one, but it's been an important one. We took this decision to make sure that Canadians remain safe, that our telecommunication networks and our businesses remain secure. And it is the right decision to take for Canada's interests. It's a decision that parallels decisions made by most of our closest allies. And we understand that it may well lead to challenges at the World Trade Organization. But we feel that it is extremely important to stand up for Canadian protection, Canadian interests, and Canadian safety. That's why we took this decision, and we stand by it.
Joining me now to look at the Huawei ban and what it might mean and what might come next are three MPs from the different parties. Taleeb Noormohamed is a Liberal MP for Vancouver-Granville. Raquel Dancho is a Conservative MP for the Manitoba riding of Kildonan-St. Paul and her party's public safety critic. And Brian Masse is the NDP member for Windsor West and his party's industry critic. All three of you, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Okay, Taleeb Noormohamed, let's start with this. I mean, the question that everyone is asking and has been asking is why did this decision and this ban take so long?
So as you know, we announced our intention to move forward on the ban of Huawei and ZTE. The reality is that this is a decision that took time because our national security agencies were involved. There's a long and considered process that needed to happen to ensure that we were making the right decision, not only in Canada's interests and in a partnership with our Five Eyes allies. And really, we lean on our national security agencies to give us the best advice. It was not a political decision. It's a decision that, again, is grounded in national security, and these things sometimes take some time.
Okay, but you mentioned the Five Eyes allies. They've been asking us to do this for 3 to 4 years now. Why did it? I mean, there seems to have been an inordinate delay.
Again, this is one of those situations where our national security agencies took the time that they needed to make the right decision, to make the recommendation, and on that basis, we've acted.
Okay, Raquel Dancho, what stands out for you in terms of this announcement and where things might go from here?
Well, the Conservative Party of Canada certainly welcomes the Liberal government finally making this decision. But again, it's been 3 years since the Prime Minister first announced he'd be making this ban. It's been over 1.5 years since the House of Commons passed a motion on the floor of the House calling on the government to ban Huawei from our 5G infrastructure. And we do feel that it does make Canada look weak, makes us look like a laggard compared to our Five Eyes allies. Those security relationships are very important, and it's very important that Canada keeps up with our allies to ensure that that confidence remains in those agreements. And so this really does represent how this government seems to approach these important international security issues. It takes much longer than our allies. And again, it causes a lack of confidence in Canada's ability to keep up with our allies.
Okay, Brian Masse, you raised this issue in question period today on Friday. What was your point?
Well, just again, is not only just with regards to the length of time that is taken, but now the consequences that we face, and also we did face by not having other players in the market, invest in our actually telco industry. That's one of the forgotten chapters about this. I mean, I first raised the issue of non-democratic governments owning Canadian companies back in 2004. We finally got changes in 2006 or 2007 with the National Security Review. But this is the same thing with private equity firms and non-democratic governments having unfettered access to some of their crown corporations. And that's really what Huawei is. So I still want to see, where's the legislation? Why did it take so long? And on top of that, what is the government going to do to actually help consumers and others that are now stuck with this equipment? Or is it basically going to be push that onto them as individuals, because some of the company's equipment is in the hands of Canadians right now, and they're the ones that pay the consequence, not the government, not the telco industries who have record profits. It's going to be Canadians that are connected to this equipment that is compromised.
Okay, Taleeb Noormohamed, I want to ask you the question. I want to put to you a quote from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. As you know, the Foreign Ministry speaks for the Chinese government. Today, what they said was regarding Canada's decision, it, quote, runs counter to market economy principles and free trade. It has seriously damaged the rights and interests of Chinese companies. They also say that China will make a comprehensive and serious assessment of the situation and take all necessary measures. What do you make of that in terms of what, trade retaliation, WTO challenge? What do you think's coming?
Well, the Chinese, are well within their rights to take whatever steps they see appropriate for their citizens and for their interests. We have acted in the interest of Canadians, in the national security interest and the economic interest of Canadians. We have acted in a way that ensures that Canadians' privacy will continue to be protected. And as you know, in this era, cybersecurity and protecting our cyber assets is critical. And this is a step that we had to take. And we are confident that whatever comes from here, we are on the right side of the decision. We are on the right side of this announcement, and we will look to working with all parties to ensure that the legislation gets through Parliament so that we can implement this.
Okay, I think we all know, too, that one of the factors involved in this, maybe directly or indirectly, was the fact that we had 2 Canadians detained, basically kidnapped and detained by the Chinese government, the 2 Michaels. It has been 8 months since they've been released for this announcement. My question to the Liberal on the panel is, should the government be warning Canadians about being in China? Are we prone to that kind of retaliation? Should Canadians be concerned on that level?
I think we need to continue to remain vigilant about where we travel. I think Canadians need to be aware of the political situations and circumstances in parts of the world where they intend to go. And we will always provide Canadians with the best advice before they make travel arrangements. They're always welcome to speak to members of Parliament. They're welcome to speak to the Department of Foreign Affairs, Global Affairs, where they will get that advice. And my hope, and I think the hope of all Canadians, is really that at the end of the day, however all of this plays out, whatever decision China chooses to make, that Canadians will understand that this decision was made in their national security interest, but that if China chooses to retaliate, Canadians need to be vigilant and need to be aware.
Okay, Raquel Dancho, what do you make of potential for retaliation? What's your party watching for or wary of?
I think what we're watching for is a Liberal response to this. We do believe we have to be strong. We have to work with our allies and ensure that we're putting a confident approach forward that's in lockstep with our allies. Canada is stronger when we move forward together with our Five Eyes allies, along with our other allies. And that's part of the issue that we've seen in the last number of years, that we've been out of step, that we've lost some of the confidence that we had with our allies. So however Canada decides to approach this, depending on how China reacts, we need to be working in lockstep with our allies to ensure that strength and that confidence is shown.
But how concerned is your caucus and is your party about this, having called for these measures for 2-3 years now, as you said? How concerned are you about potential retaliation from China?
I think our concern is that when Canada doesn't show a strong, confident stance, regardless of who the other nation may be, we look weak, and that allows other nations to take advantage of Canada and of Canadians. So again, we need to ensure that we are being strong on this, that we are working with our allies in lockstep, that we have the confidence of our allies, and that Canadians can rest assured that we will be brave and we will stand up for our values and what's best for Canada. Okay,
Brian Masse, your thoughts on this? I know some people have pointed out that other Five Eyes, our allies, Australia, United Kingdom, the United States, have imposed this kind of ban on Huawei, although in the United Kingdom it was nuanced. They've not suffered any direct retaliation, and yet Canada has seen retaliation from China on different fronts. What is your party watching for or wary of?
Well, we're definitely worried. I mean, we've actually moved towards more trade, and Harper went over to China and developed a strategy. I don't think that was well thought out, because we have now some of these holes in our system that are playing themselves out. And at that time, if you remember, it was Nortel that actually wound down operations when we actually had a Canadian icon company in China because of spying and loss of information, intellectual property. And I actually was at the facility in Beijing, and that's what they told us. And there was an all-party delegation there, and they wound down operations. Now we don't even have Nortel anymore. So we're going to be concerned about these things because they're tied to our economy. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the putting off a tough decision doesn't make things better. Even Romania acted before us. So we had to go forward. It should have been done a long time ago. The damage is only lengthened now because of the 3 years, and we're still waiting for legislation. There's going to be products in the market that people can still use with no direction about that. Software updates are taking place. So the announcement yesterday sounds really bold in terms of sticking up for the issue finally. But the reality is the details were really murky, and the legacy is still basically in your pocket, and it's also in our system, as we have a couple telcos that have relied upon Huawei in the past.
Okay, well, all three of you, we're going to continue to watch this issue as it goes, and we'll watch for the legislation. All three of you, I want to thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you
for having me.
Thank you.
Well, the political fallout continues from Alberta Premier Jason Kenney's decision to step down as leader of the governing United Conservative Party. On Friday, Premier Kenney presided over his first cabinet meeting since his announcement, and he made it clear that he will be staying on as premier and as interim leader until the party chooses a new leader.
We have a lot of important work in front of us. Following the vote from the leadership review earlier this week, as you know, I indicated my intention to step aside as United Conservative Party leader. I'll be doing so as soon as the party is elected a new leader. At that date, we'll be up to the Leadership Election Organizing Committee. And I was pleased that yesterday government caucus met and affirmed its support for this approach, allowing the government to maintain continuity and stability and to continue to focus on the people's priorities.
That was Alberta Premier Jason Kenney speaking on Friday. Now, the first person to launch her leadership campaign to replace Jason Kenney was Danielle Smith. She was speaking with reporters and party faithful at her launch on Thursday. For 5 years, Ms. Smith was the leader of Alberta's Wild Rose Party. In 2014, she led a floor crossing of Wild Rose MLAs to join the Progressive Conservative government of Jim Prentice. It was the first time in Canadian political history that an official opposition had joined a serving government. Danielle Smith joins me now from High River, Alberta. Ms. Smith, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Hi, Martin.
First question, why do you want to run for this leadership now?
Well, I have to say, I mean, I was one of the first who wanted to see the Conservative Party unified again. When Jim Prentice came back to Alberta, it was a very unpopular decision to try to bring those two parties together, and ultimately it was a failure. Both of us got crushed politically as a result. But I think with the passage of time, now that we've seen that the two parties came together the right way with Brian Jean and Jason Kenney, no one is keen to see it blow apart again. With the opposition NDP united, they've been polling around 40 to 44%. I think we now all understand in the Conservative movement here that if the two parties bust apart again, that we're very likely to see another NDP government. I'm sure that was one of the factors for why Brian Jean decided he wanted to jump back in. It's certainly the factor for why I decided I wanted to jump back in. I want to make sure that I can be a voice to try to keep these parties unified as we prepare for the next election.
Okay, that's interesting because in your answer, you've just actually gone out ahead of the other question. And that was many Albertans still to this day consider that a betrayal. They call it the grand betrayal. When you did that that floor crossing, you sort of alluded to it. What do you do to get them over that perception? That's got to be it's got to be the elephant in the room that you have to get over people's anger at that move all those years ago.
Well, you know, my caucus and I at the time, we thought that we were starting a process of merger. Obviously, you can't merge from the top. Merging always has to be done from the bottom, from the grassroots up. And the grassroots didn't want us to do it at that time, but they came around to wanting that once they saw that the split in the two parties resulted in an NDP election. So, hey, look, I've had a life since I left politics. I was on the air for 6 years. My first couple of months on talk radio were a little bit rough, but I had 3 hours a day, 5 days a week to talk through with Albertans about all of the issues that I cared about. I didn't run away. I took my lumps and I wanted to continue to be a voice of positivity and trying to find some of the answers for Alberta. So I've won over a lot of people. I still have a little bit of work to do with those who are still mad at me, but I'm pretty confident going into this that people will understand the reasons why I'm jumping back in now.
Okay, you made an allusion to you don't want to see the party split asunder or split again. A lot of people would describe the party, the UCP, as profoundly divided right now. I mean, only 51.4% gave the Premier endorsed his leadership style and his leadership. What do you do to get people over their anger about whatever it is they're angry about, and weigh in on what you think that is?
You know, the Premier has a lot of things that I've supported. I think he's done a tremendous job of representing Alberta on the national and international stage. He just came back from Washington. He's got a very strong message about how Alberta's energy sector is going to develop, including a hydrogen economy, as well as achieving net zero in our oil sands development. So he, I think, has done a really great job on that. I have a lot of background in the energy sector advocating for it, so I want to be able to continue that work on. Where he, I think, ended up misstepping with members was that he promised up and down that there would not be vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, and then he flip-flopped on that. And that left, I think, a lot of hurt feelings among those who trusted him. The other part is that we really do need to get rolling on trying to find a way to follow on Quebec's path of taking more control over our own areas of provincial jurisdiction. The federal government came through with a bill C-69, that was 4-1 in the courts last week. The Court of Appeal said was an invasion of provincial jurisdiction and would essentially gut our ability to make our own decisions on our own resource development. And as a result, people are wanting to see us push back against Ottawa's intrusion in our affairs. The Premier was not seen to be pushing back hard enough. And I can tell you that will be one of the core things I campaign on, and I suspect it will be one of the factors in this upcoming race.
Okay, a lot of people watching from around the country, and watching the Conservative movement around the country are watching, and you alluded to it. There have been a lot of very radical anti-government voices that sort of have sprung up, partly provoked or partly the catalyst being partly those vaccine mandates and things like that. But there are a lot of people who are profoundly angry and anti-government. You describe yourself as libertarian, but this kind of anger that's afoot, many people are saying is going to be a challenge to any Conservative party. What do you do to try and tame people who are just so very, very angry at all government?
I think that we shouldn't mischaracterize what the movement is about. I've been to a number of these freedom groups, and I can tell you the typical person who comes out is a mom in her 30s or 40s who can't believe that their entire lives have been disrupted in the last couple of years. There's a lot of people who just want to be left alone. They want to be able to raise their kids and go see them at hockey games, take them on camping trips, maybe go on a plane and see grandma and grandpa, and not be threatened with losing their jobs because they've decided not to take a medical procedure. So I think that the fact is the government just overstepped what most people thought, and as a result, we have a huge pushback against it. So I don't know that I would characterize it as radical. I think people just want to get back to living their normal lives. Last question,
30-second question, and that is, most probably your biggest competitor is going to be Brian Jean, who has already said that he's going to be running. He was your successor as a leader of the Wildrose Party. In 30 seconds, what would distinguish you from Brian Jean?
I'm glad both Brian and I are back in, because I think both of us want to bring that grassroots perspective and the respect for the role of the individual MLA. That was a really strong tradition in the Wildrose. And by both of us coming back in, I'm really hopeful that others will jump into the race as well so that we can broaden it out. We're seeing at the federal level a really robust race with very different ideas. And that's, I think, what's going to be exciting about a leadership contest is it allows everyone to paint their vision of what Alberta should be.
Okay, Danielle Smith will probably speak again. I want to wish you a good campaign. We'll be watching with interest as things unfold in Alberta.
Thanks so much.
Joining me now are two members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Susan Delacourt is a columnist with the Toronto Star, and Ian Bailey is a national political reporter for the Globe and Mail. First of all, both of you, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Okay, let's start with, we know that Alberta is a particular case, and we know that there are many aspects to Jason Kenney's fall from power which are particular and specific to Alberta, like his leadership style, the history of the party out there, the United Conservative Party. But Canada can't seem to resist discussing what this might mean for Conservative politics across the country in the wider sense. Susan, weigh in. You actually wrote on that today, I think, in your column.
I did. Yeah, because Canada is a small country. especially the political class. And Jason Kenney is well known to us here in Ottawa as somebody who's made his name here. And some of us were watching his troubles out there with disbelief because he was such a star in Harper's government. While, as I was writing, Harper had very much sort of the outsiders in Ottawa thing when he was in power. But Jason Kenney was the friendly, opening, welcoming face of that conservatism, drew a lot of people from the multicultural communities into the party. He seemed like he was destined for greatness. And so to watch what's happened in Alberta, which is a particular case, as you say, has been, first of all, for those of us who knew Kenney here, staggering. His decision to step down during the week was staggering as well. And I think you can't help but watch this and think, what is going on with the conservative movement? It seems that when there is this increasing explosion of anger and frustration with institutions, with everything to do with government, that it's conservative leaders who keep falling. The convoy protest killed Aaron O'Toole as federal leader. Now they're in a contest, and now it looks like the same strain of that frustration and anger has taken Jason Kenney.
Okay. Ian, your thoughts on this? How does it translate? What are the implications, if any?
Well, Mr. Kenney was here in Ottawa not too long ago for a kind of a conservative movement conference, and embraced by people who were there, seemed to be having a good time. He will now become an elder statesman. But this end for him is like a Shakespearean tragedy. This very promising politician, a star on the federal scene, goes to Alberta, unites the right, elected premier, and now he has fallen short of, I suppose, what he might have liked, which would be at least 2 terms as premier. The conservative movement is facing a bit of turmoil right now. Obviously, Aaron O'Toole has fallen. I'm speaking nationally. Aaron O'Toole has fallen. They're going through a very angry and tempestuous leadership race. But we have to see where that race goes in terms of its conclusion. I also suppose in Alberta we'll have to see who eventually succeeds Mr. Kenney and what they do with this party that with the conservative movement, provincial conservative movement in Alberta, which has been obviously very challenged over the last number of conservative premiers. Jim Prentice, Alison Redford, and obviously now Mr. Kenney. But it's quite a striking situation.
Okay, well, let's extend it then, and let's take that logical connection. Both of you made connections with the federal Conservatives. Obviously, in the big C Conservative politics, the federal Conservatives have their leadership race. Saw a number of developments this week in the federal race. Ed Fast, the finance critic, had to resign from his position because he openly criticized Pierre Poilievre's promise to fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. There were continuing allegations of racism in certain elements and certain camps of the campaign. I'll start with you, Ian. You cover the Conservatives here federally. What stood out for you in this week?
Well, it stood out for me that they lost Ed Fast, a former cabinet minister, an articulate, well-spoken chap, as their finance critic. Now, in a way, Mr. Fast himself conceded he had to go. This leadership race is like breaking apart the various parts of the caucus as they all go into the various camps to resolve this. So in some sense, maybe it wasn't surprising. It certainly wasn't surprising to Mr. Fast that he had to step down because he clearly wants to support his preferred candidate, Mr. Charest. And we shall see how this plays out. And in due course, we shall see, where the Conservatives go when, and it seems a long way off now, a leader is chosen and they come back together. Obviously, next week will be a major milestone in the race, the final official debate in Laval, Quebec, French language. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out as sort of an extension of the events this week in the Conservative leadership race. Okay,
Susan, thoughts on Ed Fast? Because as Ian mentions, I mean, he's very well respected and liked member of the caucus, finance critic. There are 2 scenarios. One is you can say, well, he should have known that as a supporter of one of the camps, he could be drawn into making comments, and maybe as finance critic, he could have recused himself as finance critic. But then others are saying, well, he was drawn in because of the nature of some of the policies being proposed, and they're almost Trump-like in their attack on institutions. What do you make of it?
Well, I'm not as close to the party and haven't discussed it like Ian has, but I can tell you what it looked to me like what Ed Fast and Jason Kenney had in common this week is that both have spoken out against the sort of extreme rhetoric coming from the Poilievre camp. I think it was an interview with Ian Bailey where Jason Kenney said at the conference in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago that he was worried about the tenor of the debate. Yeah. Ed Fast said something similar. Pierre Poilievre is not leader of the party yet. It looks like a take no prisoners even before he's won. And the question of whether he's going to win is in doubt too. I noticed too, just to loop us back to the previous conversation, that Pierre Poilievre has yet to say anything, it's Friday now, on Jason Kenney. Anything publicly. Nothing.
Yeah.
You would think they served in the same government, he would. Jean Charest did. He said, I appreciate his contribution to Canada, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But nothing from Pierre Poilievre. It does look like there is the internal torment and stress of this race is playing out in all kinds of unexpected ways.
Yeah, I mean, and to get back to that point that Danielle Smith made in the interview we just did with her on the show, I mean, she says that she does, and I think it's to your point you made, Ian, it will really depend too who, to get back to Alberta, who inherits the mantle of Jason Kenney, what direction that party goes in, because Danielle Smith claims that there is not this huge hornet's nest of radicalism. It's just people who are frustrated and want their freedom back. So a lot will depend on.
I should make clear, by the way, I did speak very briefly to Premier Kenney.
Yep.
He didn't. His comments were on the debate, and they were much shorter than that. In fairness to Mr. Fast, I did have a chance to speak to Mr. Fast yesterday, and he could see the troubles and the challenges of being a finance critic at this time and being critical of one of the candidates. And to be in fairness to him, and he says that it took some time to, shall we say, extract himself from his critic's responsibilities.
Okay, so where's this all going? The Conservative leadership race here in Ottawa. You mentioned in Laval the debate, which CPAC will be covering, the debate in French. What are you watching for in the well, at least it's not the last days, but they're going to be chosen in September. What are you watching for next turn in the Conservative leadership race, Susan?
Well, a debate in French is going to be not just language-wise different than one in English. Jean Charest has been conducting a very different kind of campaign, and he has felt like the odd man out. It may be that the others are more odd people out in the French debate. We'll see.
Yeah, and Ian, what are you watching for? Of the candidates, I mean, there's only two who are recognized as fluent in French, and that is Monsieur Poilievre and Monsieur Charest. The rest are going to be challenged.
Yeah, they're going to be quite challenged in this debate. And although it's interesting that they're all campaigning this weekend, most of them are campaigning this weekend in the Quebec area. And Leslie Lewis has got a whole number of events in Quebec. So that's going to be very interesting to see how these candidates who aren't fluent in French make themselves, express themselves, engage in rhetorical combat, because these are being feisty debates, and make their points in a language that they may not be entirely fluent in. So that's going to be fascinating to watch. Mr. Poilievre is on a certain combative path to win the leadership. It'll be eventually interesting to see if he pivots from that, but I doubt he will during the campaign, because this is the way, the tactic, the approach he seems to have decided on to try and win this thing.
And of course, there'll be different topics as well, because as we can anticipate, probably Quebec's language laws may come into it. Just a hunch. Anyway, listen, both of you, thank you very much, and I want to wish you a really good long weekend.
Good long weekend to you too.
Well, that's all for another edition of Primetime Politics on CPAC. I'm Martin Stringer. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.